My name is Daniel Dan Whitmore, and the day my father was laid out in a closed casket at St. Joseph Catholic Church in Fort Collins, my rich brother walked in late with the woman who left me 9 years ago. She leaned close, perfume sharp as a blade, and whispered, "So, I guess I won right. You're still poor." I didn't flinch because I knew what was about to happen next. The church smelled like lilies and burnt coffee. Somebody had set out those big silver urns in the fellowship hall. Early, like caffeine could patch over grief. Outside, the Colorado air had that clean bite to it, the kind that makes your nose sting the second you step out of the car. Inside, it was all muffled sounds, coats brushing the soft coughs people do when they don't know where to put their hands, the squeak of old wooden pews as folks slid in. Emily stood beside me, her fingers warm in mine. My wife, 49, calm eyes. The kind of woman who doesn't fill silence just because it's there. She wore a simple black dress and a wool coat she'd had for years. No flashy jewelry, no performance. My mother sat 2 pews up, shoulders rounded, staring at the front like if she stared hard enough, she could change what had happened. Dad Robert Whitmore had died at 82. Heart. Quick, they said. Merciful, they said. I'd learned a long time ago that people say merciful when they don't know what else to say. And then the back doors opened. A gust of cold slipped in with them, and with it came Mark. My brother Mark Whitmore, 58 tech consultant startup advisor. Whatever title sounded best on a given day, strolled down the center aisle like he owned the building. He was dressed in a dark suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack, and his shoes shone like he'd polished them in the parking lot. He didn't hurry, didn't duck his head, didn't look like a man coming to bury his father. He looked like a man arriving at a charity gala. Lauren was on his arm. Lauren Price, 52 now, the woman I'd nearly married. Black dress that probably cost more than my first car hair, done in that effortless way that takes an hour lips the color of dried roses. She'd always been good at looking like she belonged in rooms she didn't build. Heads turned. I felt it ripple through the pews the way a sudden draft moves through tall grass. Whispers started right away. "That's Mark. He made it." Of course he did. "Who's that with him?" And then softer, nastier, "Dan's here too. I heard he's still with the city." Mark always lands on his feet. The old familiar feeling tried to climb up my throat, the one that says, "You're the smaller man in your own family story." I swallowed it down. I wasn't 45 anymore. I wasn't standing in my kitchen watching my life crack open like a drop plate. Mark stopped at the end of our pew. He looked at me like he was checking an item off a list. "Dan," he murmured, polite enough for church. "Thanks for coming." He held his hand out, firm, confident, like we were business acquaintances. I stared at it for a beat too long, not out of drama, out of habit. My body still remembered what that hand had taken from me. Then I shook it once and let go. "Mom asked," I said. Mark's smile tightened. "Right." Lauren leaned in, eyes sweeping over Emily first, quick assessing the way she used to scan a room, and then landing on me. I saw the flicker of recognition, followed by that little lift at the corner of her mouth. The same expression she'd had 9 years ago when she set my engagement ring on the counter, like she was returning something that didn't fit. "It's been a long time," she said. Emily's grip on my hand didn't change. She didn't squeeze harder. She just stayed, like a steady hand on the small of your back when you're stepping off a curb. "Not long enough," I said, quiet. Lauren let out a soft laugh like I'd told a joke. "Still bitter." "I'm not bitter," I said. "I'm awake." Mark's jaw flexed once. He didn't like that. Mark preferred emotions that could be managed, mine, not his. The priest's voice began gentle and practiced. People stood, sat, knelt, stood again. All the motions, all the ritual. My mind floated in and out of the words. I watched the way Mom's shoulders shook when the choir sang "Amazing Grace." I watched Emily lean forward to pass her a tissue without making a show of it. And I watched Mark. He didn't pray. He didn't wipe his eyes. He kept checking his phone in his lap, thumb moving in short, impatient strokes. At one point, he leaned toward Lauren and whispered something that made her nod quickly, her smile too bright for a funeral. When the service ended, people flowed toward the fellowship hall like they always do. Coffee, cookies, small talk over sorrow. It's what folks our age grew up with. You show up. You eat something even if you're not hungry. You tell a story about the person who's gone, and for a moment you make them live again in a sentence. The fellowship hall was warm, too warm. The coffee smelled cheap and strong. Paper plates, store-bought cookies. Somebody had brought a casserole that sat untouched at the end of the table because nobody wants to be the first one to take a scoop at a funeral. I stood with Emily near the back, letting people come to Mom, letting her receive their condolences. Old customers from Dad's hardware stores, a retired contractor, a neighbor from his cul-de-sac, men with calloused hands and women with careful haircuts. A tall man in a navy blazer approached me with a slow, respectful smile. "Dan Whitmore," he asked. "Yes," I said, cautious. At a funeral, you don't know if the next words are going to be kindness or another reminder of what you don't measure up to. He stuck out his hand. "Tom Reyes, Housing Authority Board. I just wanted to say your dad was a fixture in this town. And I appreciate what you've done for the East Mulberry Project. Those families are finally stable." His handshake was firm, not flashy, working man firm. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. It was a team effort. Behind Tom, I saw Lauren's head snap toward us. Mark turned, 2 eyes narrowing, like he was trying to place why that name mattered. Tom continued, "We're meeting next month about the next phase. I'll reach out. And Dan, seriously, thank you." When he walked away, the air around me felt different, like the room had shifted a degree. Lauren drifted over heels, clicking on the tile. Mark followed half a step behind like he didn't want to, but couldn't stop himself. "Well," Lauren said, drawing the word out, "look at you, still doing your projects." I could smell her perfume, again expensive, floral, sharp. It took me right back to a night 9 years ago when that scent was on my pillow after she walked out with her suitcase. "You're still driving that practical car," she added, eyes flicking toward the parking lot as if she'd already checked. "I drive what I trust," I said. "I don't buy things to convince people." Her smile faltered just a hair, not because my words were cruel, because they didn't land where she wanted them to. She wanted me defensive, embarrassed, small. Mark leaned in slightly, voice low. "Since when are you on boards with people like that?" I looked at him. Really looked. The suit was perfect, but the skin around his eyes was tired. His smile was a mask he'd worn too long. "Since I stopped trying to impress the wrong audience," I said. Lauren's eyes sharpened. "So? I guess I won, right?" she whispered, close enough that her breath touched my ear. "You're still poor." For half a second, my chest tightened, not because the words were new, because my body remembered the old wound. Then I heard Mom's quiet sob behind us. I felt Emily's presence at my side, steady, real, and something in me settled. I turned and met Lauren's gaze, not angry, not pleading, just level. "Depends what you think winning costs," I said. Her brow creased. She didn't understand. And that was the point. Because 9 years ago, I thought losing her meant I'd lost everything. I didn't know I was about to gain the kind of life nobody could take from me, no matter how rich they looked walking into a room. 9 years earlier, I was 45 years old and convinced my life was already mapped out. I lived in a modest 3-bedroom ranch on the south side of Fort Collins, 10 minutes from City Hall. Beige siding, white fence that needed repainting, a lawn I mowed myself every Saturday morning before the sun got too high. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, just like the life I thought I was building. I worked as a civil engineer for the city, specializing in infrastructure maintenance, storm drainage, road resurfacing, schedules, bridge inspections, the unglamorous stuff, the kind of work nobody notices until it fails. My salary was steady, $72,000 a year, good benefits, a pension I understood and trusted. I'd never once missed a mortgage payment. Lauren used to say that was one of the things she loved about me. "You're reliable," she told me on our third date, back when that word sounded like a compliment. Lauren Price was 43, then a marketing manager at a regional firm downtown. She dressed sharp even on casual Fridays, always had a networking event to get to, always had her phone face down on the table, like it might buzz with something important at any moment. She talked about momentum a lot, about moving the needle, about how Fort Collins was nice, but maybe not forever. We met through mutual friends at a brewery on College Avenue. She laughed at my dry jokes. I liked the way she leaned in when she listened, like she wanted to be there. We dated 2 years before I proposed. I asked her on a quiet hike up near Horsetooth Reservoir. No crowd, no photographer hiding in the bushes, just the wind, the water, and a ring I'd saved 6 months for. $2,800. I remember thinking it was the most money I'd ever spent on something that fit in my pocket. She cried when she said yes. I held on to that memory for a long time after everything fell apart. Maybe too long. My brother Mark was already a presence in our relationship by then, whether I noticed it or not. Mark had always been larger than life, 4 years older, louder, faster. He'd built his tech consulting business riding the wave of companies desperate to modernize. He talked in numbers and acronyms I didn't bother to learn. He lived downtown in a glass and steel condo and drove a car that made my neighbors glance up when it idled past. Family dinners changed when Mark was around. Dad Robert Whitmore would straighten up a little when Mark walked in, ask about deals, about what's next. He never asked me about culverts or drainage systems. When I tried to explain a project, his eyes would glaze just enough to let me know he was waiting for Mark to jump back in. "You're smart," Dad told me once, pushing peas around his plate. "I just don't get why you'd settle." Settle. That word lodged itself in my chest and never really left. Lauren noticed everything. She always did. The way Mark commanded the room, the way people leaned toward him when he spoke, the way Dad nodded along like Mark was saying something profound, even when he was just talking louder. "She's impressive," Mark said, once looking Lauren up and down like he was appraising a car. "You've got good taste, little brother." I laughed it off. I trusted my brother. I trusted my fiancé. That's what people like me do. We assume loyalty until proven otherwise. The engagement dinner was when the ground really started to crack. We'd chosen a small Italian place in the Old Town district, red checkered tablecloths, candles, a place where the waiter called you folks. Just parents, Mark and Lauren. Nothing fancy. Mark arrived 20 minutes late, of course, made a show of apologizing, ordered the most expensive bottle of wine without asking what anyone else wanted. He talked about a startup acquisition, about timing the exit, about how money was just a tool. Lauren watched him like he was a TED Talk come to life. Mom pulled me aside near the restroom. "Keep an eye on this," she said softly. "You know how your brother is." I smiled. He's just being himself. Mothers see patterns, sons pretend not to. Over the next few months, Mark's name came up in our conversations more than it should have. Mark thinks the housing market's going to shift. Mark says I should look into brand consulting instead of staying where I am. Mark says you're underpaid for your skill set. Each time it sounded harmless. Advice, concern, encouragement. Until the night Lauren left her phone on the coffee table. She'd gone to shower. Steam fogged the bathroom mirror. The sound of water filled the apartment. Her phone lit up with a message preview. From Mark. "Can't stop thinking about last night." My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up. I told myself there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, something stupid and innocent. I picked up the phone. There was nothing innocent about what I read. Months of messages, plans, jokes at my expense, meetings scheduled for times when I was at work inspecting sewer lines or sitting in city council briefings, pictures I won't repeat, promises, futures. One message burned itself into my memory. "He's always been the family disappointment. You deserve more than that." When Lauren came out wrapped in a towel, smiling like everything was fine, I was sitting on the couch with her phone in my hand. "How long?" I asked. She froze. Water dripped from her hair onto the carpet. Then her face changed. Not guilt, relief. 5 months, she said. "Since your dad's birthday." The room went quiet. "Why?" I asked. She sat down across from me like she was about to negotiate a contract. "I'm tired of budgeting," she said. "Tired of waiting. Mark can give me the life I want. You're safe, Dan, but safe isn't enough anymore." She said it calmly, like it was obvious. When I called Mark the next day, he didn't deny anything. "That's how the world works," he said, laughing. "The strong take what they want." 2 weeks later, they went public. Photos, vacations, smiles too wide to be real. Dad told me to move on. Mom cried. I stopped sleeping. For months, I showed up to work hollowed out. My students, interns I mentored noticed. One kid stayed late one afternoon and said, "You okay, Mr. Whitmore? You look tired." That was the word again. Tired. And alone. But that was also when something in me finally stopped breaking and started hardening. For a long time after Lauren left, I moved through my days like I was underwater. I woke up before my alarm and stared at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks I'd never noticed before. I went to work, nodded through meetings, signed off on maintenance schedules, and drove home without remembering the drive. Food lost its taste. Evenings stretched on forever. Nights passed in thin, restless pieces. People told me time would help. What they didn't tell me was that time doesn't heal on its own. You have to give it something to work with. The first thing I rebuilt was my routine. I stopped going straight home after work. I joined a small gym on the north end of town, nothing fancy, rubber mats, chipped dumbbells, a couple of retired guys who nodded at everyone like they'd been waiting for you all day. I ran until my lungs burned. I lifted until my arms shook. The physical pain was easier to manage than the quiet kind. Work became my anchor. I volunteered for projects nobody wanted. Emergency culvert replacements after heavy rain. Weekend site checks. Long evenings reviewing plans. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about staying upright. And slowly, almost without noticing, I started learning again. A co-worker mentioned rental property one afternoon while we were standing over a set of drainage maps. "You ever think about buying a duplex?" he asked. "City works steady, but money like that works while you sleep." I laughed at first. Real estate sounded like something Mark would brag about at a dinner party. But the idea stuck. I spent nights reading instead of scrolling. Books on cash flow, long-term investing, risk management, boring titles that didn't promise miracles. I like that. I didn't trust anything that promised miracles anymore. 6 months later, I bought my first duplex on the edge of town. Beige brick. One side rented, the other vacant. I put nearly every spare dollar I had into the down payment, painted the empty unit myself on weekends, fixed leaky faucets, learned the difference between a cheap repair and a smart one. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not my friends. Certainly not Mark. That first year, nothing went smoothly. A tenant skipped rent and disappeared. A water heater failed at 2 a.m. I sat on the kitchen floor once paperwork spread around me, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. That was my first low point. I remember sitting in my car afterward, engine off forehead, resting on the steering wheel. The streetlight outside flickered. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom, something about Mark being featured in a local business magazine. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Mark's life was loud. Mine didn't need to be. I sold one investment that wasn't working, took the loss, kept the duplex, learned from the mistake instead of hiding it. That decision saved me later. While Mark posted photos from conferences and rooftop bars, I spent evenings balancing spreadsheets and weekends, walking properties with a tape measure in my pocket. While he talked about exits, I talked to plumbers and electricians and tenants who just wanted things to work. 2 years passed like that. Then 3. I bought another property, then a small 4-unit building. Nothing flashy, clean, functional, near bus lines and grocery stores. Places people could afford without drowning. At work, I was promoted to lead engineer on a redevelopment corridor project, roads, drainage, pedestrian access. I saw the city from a different angle now, not just how to maintain it, but how it grew. That's when the idea clicked. I wasn't just good at fixing things. I was good at making them last. I formed Whitmore Urban Works quietly, an LLC with a borrowed desk at a shared office space, and a banker who trusted numbers more than charisma. We started small rehabbing older properties, partnering with the city on infrastructure improvements, working with local credit unions instead of chasing big investors. Money started showing up not all at once, not loudly, but consistently. Around that same time, Mark's voice changed when he called Mom. She didn't tell me much, but I could hear it between the lines. Contracts taking longer, deals falling through, timing issues, she said once, like she was repeating his words. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to. By the time Mark started worrying about image, I'd stopped worrying about survival. And by the time he noticed I was moving differently, I was already too far ahead to explain it to him. By the time I turned 50, money had stopped being the loudest thing in my life. That wasn't because I had a lot of it, though. By then I did. It was because I finally understood what it was for. Whitmore Urban Works didn't explode overnight. There was no viral moment, no headline splashed across a screen. What happened instead was quieter and sturdier. Projects closed on schedule. Tenants stayed longer. Lenders returned my calls. Inspectors stopped looking twice at my paperwork because they already knew how it would look. I started buying things that don't impress strangers, but calm your nerves when you own them. Land near a bus line, a small medical office building leased to a family clinic, a grocery-anchored strip with a pharmacy and a barber shop that had been there 20 years. The kind of places people still need when the economy hiccups. I didn't change my house, didn't upgrade my car. I still drove the same Ford Explorer I'd had since my 40s because it ran smooth and never surprised me. I still ate breakfast at the same diner on Mason Street every Friday, 2 eggs over easy rye toast coffee black. The waitress Carla knew my order and never asked if I wanted more coffee. She just brought it. That was my version of success. Predictable, boring, peaceful. Around that time, the city invited me to sit in on a housing advisory committee unpaid thankless work that mostly involved folding chairs and long meetings. I said yes anyway, not because it looked good, but because I'd lived long enough to know where the real decisions get made. That's where I met Emily Carter. She was running a nonprofit focused on workforce housing teachers, nurses, tradespeople, people like the ones who'd kept Fort Collins running while others chased bigger stages. Emily wasn't loud. She listened more than she spoke. When she did talk, it was about outcomes, not credit. After one meeting, we ended up walking to the parking lot together under a sky that looked like it might snow. You always ask about maintenance 10 years out, she said. Most people don't. Things break if you ignore them long enough, I replied. She smiled, not the polite kind, the real kind. We started getting coffee after meetings, then dinners, then walks where we talked about work and parents and what it felt like to rebuild something after it fell apart. I told her about Lauren early, about Mark, about the money too eventually. I waited until I knew it wouldn't matter. Emily listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Money doesn't scare me, Dan. Ego does." I knew then she wasn't going anywhere. While my life was settling into something solid, Mark's was doing the opposite. I ran into him one afternoon outside the county courthouse. He was pacing near the steps, phone pressed tight to his ear, voice low but urgent. "No, not today," he hissed. "I told you next quarter." He spotted me and froze, straightened his jacket, smiled like nothing was wrong. "Dan," he said, "didn't know you worked around here." "I do," I said, "every day." He laughed a little too hard. "Still grinding, huh?" "Still building," I replied. He glanced at my car, then back at me. "You ever think about upgrading?" I looked at his sleek, expensive parked Crooked like it didn't care where it landed. "I don't buy things that make me nervous," I said. He didn't know what to do with that. A year later, Whitmore Urban Works closed on its largest project, yet a mixed-use redevelopment the city had been nursing for a decade. Infrastructure upgrades, affordable units, long-term leases, nothing flashy, everything useful. At the ribbon cutting, a city councilwoman shook my hand and said, "This is the kind of work people remember." I believed her. I married Emily 6 months later, small ceremony, close friends. My mother cried the good kind of tears. Mark didn't attend. Lauren sent a card with a short note and a signature that looked rushed. I didn't keep it. By the time my father's health started to fail, my life was full in ways it had never been before. Work that mattered, a marriage that felt like a partnership, nights I slept through without waking up wondering what I'd lost. I didn't know then that all of it, every quiet choice, every boring decision, was about to be weighed in one public moment. But I was ready for it. Emily didn't fall in love with my resume. That mattered more than she'll ever know. We met in fluorescent lit rooms with folding chairs and bad acoustics. Long meetings where half the people talked just to hear themselves talk. I noticed Emily because she didn't. She took notes. She asked questions that began with, "How does this affect people who already live here?" She remembered names. She followed up. The first time we had coffee, it was at a small place off College Avenue that roasted their beans too dark and played the same folk playlist on repeat. She ordered tea, I ordered coffee. We sat by the window and watched snow slide off the awning in wet clumps. So she said, stirring her cup, "Are you always this prepared?" "For meetings," I asked. "For life." I thought about that, about how unprepared I'd felt the night Lauren walked out, about how preparation had slowly become my armor. "I learned the hard way," I said. Emily didn't press. She never did. She had a way of giving people room without disappearing from the conversation. That's a rare skill, especially in people who run organizations. We dated slowly, no big gestures, no whirlwind weekends. We went on walks, cooked dinners, attended community events where nobody cared what kind of car you drove. She met my mother early on and brought her a loaf of banana bread that was still warm. Mom liked her immediately. That should have scared me. It didn't. I didn't tell Emily about the money at first. Not because I was hiding it, but because I needed to know something before I said it out loud. I needed to know who she was when there was nothing to weigh. 6 months in sitting at my kitchen table with the windows open and the smell of rain coming in, I told her everything. The properties, the company, the long-term leases, the way my net worth had crept past a line I never thought I'd cross. She listened. Then she shrugged. Okay, she said. Does any of that change who you are at dinner? No, I said. Then it doesn't change anything for me. That was the moment I stopped bracing for impact. We married 2 years later. Small ceremony at a local community center. Folding chairs again. My mother cried. Emily laughed when I forgot my vows halfway through and whispered the last line back to me. We didn't take a honeymoon to someplace exotic. We drove up to Steamboat Springs and rented a cabin. Cooked our own meals, slept late. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Emily took on more responsibility at her nonprofit. I continued expanding Whitmore Urban Works carefully. No shortcuts, no debt that kept me up at night. We talked about values more than goals, about what we wanted our days to feel like when we were 60, 70. Around that time, I started hearing Lauren's name again. Not from her, from my mother. She's doing well, Mom said once tentative. At least, that's what she says. I didn't ask questions. Then my father died. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Emily was grading grant proposals at the kitchen table. I answered the phone, listened, and felt something close quietly inside me. Not grief the way movies show it. More like the end of a long argument you never really won. At the funeral, Emily was the one who stayed close to my mother, who refilled her coffee, who walked her to a chair when her knees shook. Lauren watched that from across the room. I saw it in her eyes before she ever spoke to me, the comparison starting, the old math failing her. When she leaned in and whispered, I won, right, she was asking a question. She'd been asking herself for 9 years. And she already knew the answer scared her. Lauren asked her question like she was finishing a sentence she'd started years ago. So, I guess I won, right? She said again, quieter this time. You're still poor. For a moment, the fellowship hall faded into background noise. The clink of cups, the low hum of voices, the rattle of the old heater kicking on. What stayed with me was the look on her face. Not smug, not cruel, uncertain. I didn't answer her right away. That pause did more than any insult ever could. Mark shifted beside her, irritation flashing across his face. He hated pauses. Pauses meant loss of control. Lauren, he said, tight, this isn't the time. She didn't look at him. Emily stood half a step behind me, one hand resting lightly between my shoulder blades. Not gripping, just there. Like an anchor you don't notice until the water gets rough. I never thought of it as winning or losing, I said finally. I thought of it as choosing. Lauren scoffed, but there was no conviction behind it. That's easy to say when you're still driving the same car. I drive what works, I replied. I stopped buying things to prove something a long time ago. Mark let out a sharp breath. You always did love pretending money didn't matter. It matters, I said, just not the way you think. Before he could fire back, my mother's voice rose from behind us, thin but steady. Dan. I turned. She was standing with a man I recognized immediately, Tom Reyes from the Housing Authority. He had his jacket draped over the back of a chair, sleeves rolled up, like he'd been working all morning. Sorry to interrupt, Tom said, nodding toward Mark and Lauren with polite indifference. I wanted to say goodbye before I head out. Of course, I said. Tom shook my hand again, firmer this time. I meant what I said earlier. That East Mulberry project, those families were on the brink. You stabilized it without pushing anyone out. That's rare. A few nearby conversations quieted. People leaned in without realizing it. You did right by this town, Tom continued. Your father would have been proud. The words landed heavier than anything Lauren had said all day. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd stepped forward instinctively, like this moment belonged to him by default. It didn't. Lauren's face drained just a shade. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mark's phone light up. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. He turned away, stepping toward the hallway. Not now, he muttered into the receiver. I told you after today. Lauren watched him go, confusion spreading across her face. Emily leaned down toward my mother, speaking softly. Let's sit for a minute. You don't have to stand. Mom nodded gratefully. As Emily guided her to a chair, Lauren noticed something else: the way people smiled at Emily, the way they thanked her for helping, the way she moved through the room like she belonged there without trying. Lauren looked back at me, eyes searching. You really don't care, she said, almost accusing, about any of it. I thought about the nights I couldn't sleep, the duplex with the broken water heater, the spreadsheet glow at 2 a.m, the years nobody clapped for. I cared, I said, just not about the race you were running. Mark reappeared, face tight, smile gone. He avoided my eyes. Lauren swallowed. So what? You think you're better than us now? I shook my head. No, I stopped competing 9 years ago. I started building a life I could actually live in. She stared at me, and in that moment I saw it clearly, the realization setting in that she'd been chasing noise, mistaking motion for progress. I hope you found what you wanted, she said quietly. I did, I answered, eventually. She nodded once, like someone conceding a point they'd argued too long. Then she followed Mark toward the door, heels clicking faster than before. The room exhaled. Emily came back to my side, slipping her hand into mine. My mother looked up at me, eyes tired but warm. He was wrong about you, she said. Your father. He knew it at the end, but he didn't know how to say it. I squeezed her hand. It's okay. As people began to leave, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge. Closure. The parking lot was nearly empty when Emily and I finally stepped outside. The sky had turned that flat Colorado gray that comes right before snow, and the air smelled clean, almost metallic. I stood for a moment with my hands in my coat pockets, listening to the crunch of gravel under our shoes and the distant hum of traffic on College Avenue. It felt strange how quiet everything was after a room full of voices, judgments, and old history. Emily reached for my hand. You okay? She asked. I nodded, and this time it wasn't automatic. Yeah, I really am. We drove home without talking much. The heater clicked on and off. The Ford's engine hummed steady the way it always had. When we pulled into our driveway, the porch light flicked on, automatically warm against the cold. Predictable. Reliable. The things I'd learned to value. That night, after Emily fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table alone. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I just sat there, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, thinking about the strange symmetry of it all. 9 years earlier, I'd sat in that same spot, staring at an engagement ring on the table, convinced my life had collapsed in on itself. I'd thought I'd been rejected because I wasn't enough, didn't earn enough, didn't shine enough, didn't move fast enough. What I hadn't understood then was that losing Lauren hadn't been a verdict on my worth. It had been a release. Mark and Lauren had gone on chasing louder lives, bigger rooms, faster wins. From what I heard later through family, through secondhand comments, they never quite stopped running. Mark's contracts kept getting shorter. Lauren kept changing jobs, cities, goals, always one step from whatever came next. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing about their struggles. I just felt done. Emily and I built something quieter. Mornings with coffee and the paper. Work days that ended without dread. Evenings where nothing dramatic happened, and that was exactly the point. We talked about the future, not in terms of upgrades or status, but in terms of time, who we'd help, where we'd stay rooted. Whitmore Urban Works kept growing slow and steady. Projects finished. Neighborhoods improved. Families stayed. When people thanked me now, it wasn't because I impressed them. It was because their lives were a little easier. That mattered. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about what my life would have been like if Lauren hadn't left. I do, briefly. Then I picture the version of myself who would have spent years trying to keep up with someone else's expectations. I wouldn't trade the life I have now for anything. The truth is, the best revenge isn't humiliation or payback. It's living well enough that the people who once doubted you have nothing left to measure you against. It's choosing substance over spectacle, peace over applause. If you've ever been underestimated, written off, or left behind because you didn't move fast enough for someone else's race, I hope this story reminds you of something important. There's more than one way to win. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own path. Share your thoughts or your story in the comments if you feel inclined. And if you'd like to hear more stories about quiet victories, hard-earned peace and lives rebuilt the long way, consider subscribing. Thank you for listening.